Now we get to the gift of exhorter. And we need exhorters to lift us up and give us hope and give us good advice and help us keep going. Exhorter. And this is the ability to encourage others and can lead them to practical steps of growth. So they're encouragers. For example, Barnabas, whose name was Joseph, I believe, but they called him Barnabas because Barnabas meant son of encouragement. When Saul became Paul, the Apostle Paul, and many Christians did not believe he had really become a Christian, Barnabas was the one who believed in him and took him to the other disciples. And then later, when Paul was off in Tarsus in the desert, Barnabas went to the church of Antioch, promoted Paul, and brought Paul there, and pretty much built Paul up because he saw the potential in Paul as a missionary leader. And as a result, Paul was supported by this church and went out on various missionary journeys. And you'll notice as you read the book of Acts, it talks about Barnabas and Paul, Barnabas and Paul. And later it says Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas was such a good encourager. He lifted up Paul to become greater than himself. And Barnabas even believed in also John Mark. You may remember Barnabas and Paul actually had an argument because they were on a missionary journey with John Mark. And John Mark had failed, in a sense, in the previous journey because he left early. So Paul said, no, we're not bringing John Mark with us on this journey. He failed in the last outreach. And Barnabas said, no, he's a good guy. He's doing better now. Let's bring him along. And Paul said no. And they split ways. And Barnabas took John Mark with him, and Paul took Silas with him, and they went on two separate journeys. But later, Paul did write that John Mark was doing well. So Barnabas believed in John Mark, though he had failed, and was able to build him up. So that's what encouragers do. They believe in people. They want to build up people and give them another chance. Judas and Silas also were encouragers. We see in Acts 15:32, Judas and Silas, who themselves were prophets, said much to encourage and strengthen the believers. So exhorters like to encourage and strengthen people. Here's some aspects. Committed to help people grow spiritually. That's really the goal of the exhorter. How is this person going to grow? They're able to see root problems. Sometimes there can be a problem kind of on the surface, but the exhorter can see deeper and see, oh, there's something else going on here. You know, like I heard a story about one Bible college where there was a certain girl in this Bible college, and every now and then she would faint. She would just be sitting having lunch and she falls to the floor and faints, and people would come and pray for her and make sure she was okay. Sometimes she'd be in class and she would faint, and it seemed like a strange problem. But one leader of this Bible school, who was an exhorter, saw there probably was something deeper and managed to talk with this girl and counsel with her. Eventually it came out that she was fainting just to get attention and prayer. So they can see the root problems. They give people steps of action. They like to give you something practical to do. You feel far away from God? Okay, spend 15 minutes reading the Bible, 15 minutes in prayer, time of confession. They'll give you things to do. They raise hope for solutions. They see benefits in problems. So if you lose your job, they'll say something like, well, God must have something better for you. They gain insight through experience. Now, a pure teacher will only go from the Bible. They look for the truths of the Bible, which is good. Exhorters are also open to look at their own life, look at other people's lives, and learn through experience as to what happens when a person does this and what happens when a person does that. And for this reason, they often can see where things are heading. Like I heard about one church where there was a man in this church who was having some problems in his marriage. So he was talking to this pastor of his church, and the pastor said, well, you should read this one book I have, which is about how to solve problems in your marriage. And the man said, oh, I'm reading that book. In fact, my secretary is also having problems in her marriage, so she and I get together and we're reading this book together to discuss how to improve our marriages. Well, this pastor had experience and he knew where this thing might be going. And he said to this man, have you kissed her yet? The man says, what? Have you kissed your secretary yet? The man says, what are you talking about? We're just meeting to go through this book. And got all angry. Well, you know what happened? That man did end up divorcing his wife and running off with that secretary. And see, the pastor, he had seen experiences like this. He knew where this was going. Desire to share face-to-face. Exhorters like to counsel people. Personally, they like to share face-to-face because they can really see your reactions and see how you're receiving things. They're always encouraging people, just going here and there encouraging people. And we all should be doing this. We all need to be encouraging. We all need to grow in encouragement. But these people with this gift, it just flows from them naturally, and they're saying very encouraging things often. And you're always glad to see those people. They see potential in people. That's why exhorters make good DTS staff, because these students arrive who are new to things and they don't know what their giftings are and they may have some problems, but an exhorter can see through all that and say, this person has great potential, that person has wonderful potential. All right, misuses of the gift of exhorter. So if you're an exhorter, be careful. Counseling some people too much. Some exhorters keep counseling and counseling and counseling. Well, there's some people, you just have to let them go and let them apply what they've learned. And if you spend too much counseling them, then they're just coming to you and not really to God. Looking only to self for solutions instead of God and His Word. Sometimes if you have experience in counseling, you just kind of figure, well, I know what the answer is. But we always need to listen to God in each situation and remember the principles from the Bible. Causing others to depend on them. Again, that's when you're counseling too much. The person is focusing on you and getting from you and not really getting from God. Sharing private illustrations. Well, if you're counseling a bunch of people, you're likely going to hear some private type things. And you have to be careful. You can't just turn around to someone else and say, well, this person I just talked to was saying that very same thing. No, remember that you need to respect people's privacy and not gossip about things that you have heard in these counseling times. Presenting truth out of balance. Now, the exhorters tend to go more off of experience and more off of that sort of thing, whereas the teacher will go off the Word of God and different Bible verses and so on. Sometimes what has happened is some exhorters have gone off course on some truth, but they go totally into that truth and they forget the balance of the other truths from the Word of God. One example would be Rob Bell. Rob Bell was a pastor, very popular pastor years ago, and he would write books about the love of God, and God loves us like a father, but he focused so much on the love of God, he kind of let go of other truths. He wrote a book that was called Love Wins, And in this book, he said that ultimately love will win. In other words, everyone who dies will one day go to heaven because ultimately they'll accept Jesus and go to heaven. It sounds wonderful, but it's not true. And so he was presenting truth out of balance. Hebrews 3:13 says, "But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." So we need to encourage each other, and that'll help people stay on the good way. It's interesting, if a person never gets encouragement, their heart could become hardened. So we need to help each other in this way. Encourage each other. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that may benefit those who listen." So when you speak to other people, are you benefiting them? Are you building them up? I have seen some Christians who tend to tear down subtly, just in their conversation, while others subtly in their conversation are always building up. Which are you? I heard about, and also another thing is, encouragement can bring out the potential of others. It can bring out treasures that maybe are buried. So as we encourage each other, we're helping that person to maybe come forward with some great thing that can benefit the world. There was a professor in England, like an English professor, who had been teaching for many years, a Christian man, and he had been teaching. It was kind of a routine to him, teaching. I think he taught at Harvard or Yale or one of those well-known colleges. Oh, Oxford, I believe it was, as he lived in England. And so he'd been teaching for some time and occasionally would write papers and so on. And he wrote some stories for his children, some allegorical stories. And he was thinking of making that into a book, but he never finished it. His children grew up, and he had written quite a bit and just kind of threw the manuscript in a cupboard. But someone found out about it, some friend of his. And that friend came to him and said, "Is it true that you were working on a children's book with Christian allegories?" And he said, "Yes." And so the friend said, "Well, why don't you finish the book?" And so he decided to do that. He finished the book, and that book was called The Hobbit, which came part of the Lord of the Rings, that great movie you saw based on his book. So we have that book and those movies because someone encouraged him to do this thing. So let's encourage each other. One thing we can do is practice positive gossip. You know how gossip tends to be negative and we kind of whisper bad things about other people, but let's practice positive gossip. And that is, you begin to spread good things about other people. And that can change the atmosphere. And what's even more encouraging is if you hear something said about a person that's good, go to that person and tell them what you heard about them. I mean, don't you like it when you hear something that someone has said about you behind your back that was good? So we need to do more of that sort of thing. I remember I was at a dinner years ago when I was in university. My parents were at this dinner, and my mother always dressed very nice, very well groomed, and looked very nice. And one other student said, she said, "Oh, your mother is just beautiful." And then she said, "Actually, later on, tell her I had said that." So later on, I mentioned to my mother, "Oh, this one student, saw you," and she said, "Oh, your mother is beautiful." And my mother said, "Oh, really? Really?" She really liked that. And then an hour or two later, my mother was saying, "Who's that girl who said that I was beautiful?" So people really like positive gossip. And one good thing about encouragement, it is free. It is free to give out to other people. Doesn't cost us anything. And people need it so much, and people are benefited by it so much. So think of nice, encouraging, hopeful things that you can share with others, and that will help improve any environment that you are in. Because, really people are starving for encouragement. They're starving for hope. And hope can go a long way in helping. There was one scientist, like a biologist, who did a bizarre experiment. This is back in the 1950s. His name was Kurt Richter. And what he did was he took some mice and he put them in jars of water to see how long they would swim around the top before they drowned, because there was no way for them to get out. And so it's just a matter of how long. And so he decided to do this and found that they lasted usually about 15 minutes. So about 15 minutes, they'd be swimming around, and then finally the mouse would just kind of give up and drown. Then he decided to do something different. He put he would put the mouse in the jar, let it swim around and round. Then at the 15-minute mark, he could tell. He knew the moment when this mouse was about to give up. So he reached into the jar, take the mouse out, dry it off, and leave it for a day. The next day, he would take that mouse and put it back in a jar of water. And do you know how long those mice, and this is several mice that did this, do you know how long they swam the second time they were put in the jar of water? On the average, about 3 days. 72 hours they swam around that little jar of water. Why? What was the difference? Because they had hope. They were given hope that they could be rescued this time. So people need encouragement and really enjoy it. There was a teacher years ago, back in the 70s or 60s, I believe, named Sister Helen Marosla. And she was a teacher at St. Mary's Junior High School, a Catholic school in Morris, Minnesota, USA. And she taught subjects like math and geometry and those sort of things. And one time she was teaching these students, but they were having a difficult day and people were distracted and a bit irritated. And so she thought, okay, let's do something different. So she gave each student a paper and had them write what things they admired and liked about the other students in the class. And so all the students wrote what they liked about the other students. They handed in the papers to Sister Helen, and she took them home, typed out something for each student from all the things people had said about them, and handed them out to the students. And they liked it, and not much else was said, and then they went on with their math lessons. Well, years later, during the Vietnam War, there was one of the students who had been very popular in that school, a very friendly guy named Mark Eklund. He had gone to Vietnam as a soldier and was killed. And so his funeral was being held back in Morris, Minnesota. And Sister Helen was there, and many of these students who had been in this class were there. And when they had this funeral, someone came up to Sister Helen and said, I thought you'd like to see this. This was found in Mark's pocket when he was out in Vietnam. And they opened it up, and it was that piece of paper of encouragements that he had gotten from his classmates. And some classmates were there when she saw this, and another girl said, well, I keep mine with me too. And she had it in her purse. And someone else said, oh yeah, I have that in my photo album. And someone else said, yeah, I keep that in my drawer. So these people kept this thing for years because people so much benefit from encouragement. And that's why 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore encourage and build one another up." Okay? Now, if you're listening to this or watching this in a group, here's an exercise you can do if you have not done it, is each of you take out your notebook, put your name on the top, and then go around to everyone else's notebooks, and you can all write encouraging words for each other. Qualities you like in each other, things you admire in each other, encouraging words. And this way, all of you can have a page full of encouraging words from the others who are with you. I've done this a number of times. I think I've always kept those pieces of paper because they're so encouraging. So, enjoy. So that's the gift of exhorter. And see, there's a difference between exhorter and teacher. An exhorter is someone who learns from life a lot. They learn from experiences, as I said, right? Whereas a teacher will only go from the Bible. And with me, by the way, you get both, because I'm both a teacher and exhorter. So I like to get lots of facts and learn lots of things and get into the Bible, but also I learn from experience. Well, in all Christian activities, there's always a material need for things. And it's great that we have people who have the gift of giving. Giver. And this is the ability to give gladly and generously and in an effective way. And people in the Bible, well, the poor widow. Jesus commended the poor widow because she gave everything she had to live on, which was just a small coin. So it's not a matter of the amount that you're giving, but how much of what you have are you giving out? Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus was rich, and he was very generous with his money after he accepted Jesus.
Show us, Lord, show us the true way.
This man truly is a prophet.
My Lord and Master, save me. Hey.
Let me see that determined. Oh, Lord, save us, save us. Lord.
Show us the true way, Lord.
You stop. Move out of the way. That's the tax collector.
Hurry down, Zacchaeus, for I must stay in your house today.
My house?
I want to stay in his house.
Zacchaeus, no, Jesus.
But rich, friend, rich.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yes, excellent. Listen. I give half of my belongings to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone, I will pay him back 4 times as much.
I don't believe it. A tax collector paying back his taxes.
Salvation has come to this house today, for this man also is a descendant of Abraham.
Barnabas was also a giver. Here we see in Acts 4:33-37. With great power the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. And here are some aspects of the gift of giver. They take an interest in who they give to. So they don't just give out to anyone or everybody. They take an interest. They desire to give secretly. Remember, Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And one reason they like to give secretly is so that people don't depend on them, and also so that they're doing it out of goodness to God and not for credit. Concerned that giving will corrupt. Givers are careful to give where it will not cause people to look too much towards money. And that's happened. We've seen, I heard about one person in ministry who had a good ministry going on in a village area and reaching different villages. But some foreigners gave him a lot of money for his ministry, and he ended up misusing that money and buying a house and other things like that instead of for ministry. So he was kind of sidelined as a result of being corrupted by giving. And so givers are careful not to cause that to happen. Thrifty. Givers are careful with their money. They may take the bus instead of the auto and go to certain shops that are less expensive and so on, saving their money, and then they can give out more. They give to causes others overlook. So if there's a big ministry that's well known, and then somewhere else there's a very small ministry, unknown, they'll want to give that small ministry because they know they're not getting the attention and the money that the big ministry is getting. They're alert to what others do with their money. So they're watching. And for example, you might have a DTS student who, during the lecture phase of the DTS, is going around the town and going to restaurants and spending money and having fun and buying this and buying that. And then they get towards the time of going for the outreach, and the student will say, "Oh, pray for me. I don't have enough money for my outreach." And so a giver would not want to give to someone like that because they weren't really saving when they needed to. Givers, they want to give to real needs. So they're really looking, what impact is this ministry going to have? How is this really going to meet needs of people? Misuses, waiting too long to give. Sometimes they're too overly careful, or giving too quickly. Using gifts to control people. Sometimes people will give money to different people, but kind of expect them to do what they want them to do. They're using funds to control people. We should freely give and not expect anything out of the people that we give to. Causing others to look to them instead of God. If you're giving to certain people in maybe too much at a time, they begin to look at you instead of God. So that's another reason to give secretly, so people look to God. Rejecting all pressure appeals. A pressure appeal is when a church says, we're building a new sanctuary. We need to take a second offering. Oh, you people aren't giving enough. We're going to take another offering, and we're going to have a dinner tomorrow, or we're going to take an offering. And it's kind of pressure. And givers don't like this, and they will tend to not give to those things. But sometimes, maybe you are meant to give, because there really is a big need there. Luke 6:38 says, "Give, and it will be given to you. In good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, it will be poured unto your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured you." So there's a saying, you can't outgive God. So try it out, increase your giving, and you'll find that God's river of a provision will keep running in your life. Sometimes, in fact, a while back, a couple years ago, our financial support was coming down, and I decided to go in the opposite direction and increase our giving. And we did see it come back up. Reinhard Bonnke, famous healing evangelist from Germany, who died recently. He decided he wanted to really learn God's provision. So when he was in Bible school, he gave away all of his money to charity so that he had to provide on God. And one time he had to go visit his parents in another part of Germany, and he had no money to visit them, no money for ticket, but by faith he went to a travel agency and ordered a train ticket. And they said, yes, okay, we'll let you know when it's ready and when you can pay for that. And so then the travel agent called and said, well, your train ticket's ready. You can come pay for it and pick it up anytime. But he didn't have the money. And so a few days went by and the travel agent called again and said, well, your ticket's ready and your trip is tomorrow. You better come and pay and get your ticket. And he still didn't have the money. And finally the day came and he didn't have the money. And so he got together with some friends and said, oh, we need to pray that this money will come in now. And so they began to pray for the provision. And at one point during that prayer meeting, Reinhard Bonnke stood up and said, I know it's here. I know God has provided. And so by faith, he walked outside. Just as he walked outside, this big, heavy, fat man came running up to him, sweating as if he'd been running for a while, and said to Reinhard Bonnke, and he didn't even know him, how much do you need? And Reinhard Bonnke said, I'm not going to tell you. God knows the amount. And the man just took a wad of cash in his hand and gave it to Reinhard Bonnke and said, here, and walked away. Reinhard Bonnke counted the money. It was exactly what he needed for his ticket. So he quickly got his luggage, went to the travel agent, paid for the ticket, got the ticket, went to the train station, and caught the train as it was leaving the platform. So trusting God and giving more, that's something that we can grow in. And groups can have gifts in a sense. Certain groups and can be stronger in gifts, like YWAM, for example. I would say YWAM is fairly strong in intercession and evangelism, right? And certain YWAM bases can have certain emphases. I went to one base in Guwahati, India, and this base ended up being good at giving because when I went there as a guest speaker, we'd be eating chapati for I think we had chapati for lunch and then we had chapati for dinner. And then the next day for lunch, again, we had chapati. Now, this is unusual because most Indians, as you know, want rice. And we were just having chapati. And I said to the people there, wow, you guys are really into chapati. And they said, yeah, we just like chapati. And that's all they said. And then one of the leaders of the base gave me several thousand rupees. I think it was like 7,000 rupees. And this is a new base. This was a small, new base, not many people. But they gave me like 6,000 rupees to bring to Madras to give to the School of Pioneering there. It was their offering to the other school. And I thought that was quite generous. But later, I happened to be by the kitchen, and I overheard the cook sharing with other staff, saying, we just got an offering at our base. Someone gave us some funds, and now we're able to buy some rice. You know what? It turned out that they only had this chapati mix. They didn't have anything else. They had no money for anything else. They did not tell me that. And but yet at the same time, they were giving away 6,000 rupees. So to me, that was the gift of faith, and God provided for that base. Rick Warren, now he's a well-known pastor of Saddleback Church in Southern California for many years. And when he was young and entering ministry, he and his wife were tithing 10%. But they decided, well, let's try to live more by faith each year. So each year, they would increase their giving. And the next year they might be 11 or 12% or 13%. The next year, 15%. And finally, he got to a point where they were giving like 90% of their income. And yet God was providing all that they needed. And around this time, he got the vision to write a book. And the book was The Purpose-Driven Life, about many different things, many different aspects of our Christian life. And this became immensely popular, and they even began, purpose-driven life groups around the world. The book sold internationally. The book made millions of dollars. And he was even able to take that money and start new ministries with it. But you see, I believe God chose him to write that book. God entrusted him with the idea for that book because God knew that he would use that money from that book, not for himself, but for others. And he, like I said, he used money from that book to start a new ministry, and he even repaid the church, Saddleback Church. He paid them the salary they had paid him back several years. So as we give, as we're more generous, God can multiply it back to us. So let's all grow in the gift of giving. Increase your giving wherever you're at. We all should be tithing, but go beyond that and then go further and further. Let's all increase our giving, see it multiply back to us, and see great things happen in the kingdom of God. If you ever want to accomplish any great thing, you need a team. Yeah, if you want to climb a hill by yourself, you can do that. But if you want to climb an Everest, you need a team. And if we're going to have teams, we need to have leaders. So all of us should be working on growing in leadership so we can build up more teams and accomplish great things. Leadership. Leadership is the ability to set goals and then to recruit and lead others to accomplish them. Some good natural leaders in the Bible would include Joshua, who led the armies of Israel. Joshua was a natural leader. Unlike Moses, by the way, Moses did not really have the gift of leadership. In fact, remember when God asked Moses to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt? Moses said, "Oh Lord, send someone else." He was not a natural leader. But Moses did lead well through other gifts like miracles and faith. Another natural good leader was David. And even when David was on the run, away from King Saul and other people, there were people who followed him. So that's a big clue if you're a leader. Do people follow you? Deborah. Yes, women can make very good leaders. She was such a good leader that the king would not go into battle without her. Nehemiah, who was a model of leadership, the way he led the efforts to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And of course, Paul, who led missionary efforts reaching the Roman Empire with the gospel. Here are some aspects of leadership. People believe in them and follow them. There's some leaders I know in YWAM, if they went to some different place and said, "Can you join my team?" I'd be very tempted to do so, no matter where they went. They're such good leaders. Do people believe in you and follow you? They can inspire others to get involved. So I've seen some people say, "I'm going to do this project, I'm going to start this thing, this base, this ministry," and no one else joins them. That shows something, that maybe they're not really leaders. Have confidence in God and themselves. Yes, we can do this. Yes, God is with us. They see how best to use people. They look around and they think, what can this person do? And they try to fit the role that person has with their gifting. Now, a wrong way to do it, and I saw this done at one YWAM base I was at, the base director said, okay, you do accounting, you do cooking, you do this, you do that. He just kind of slotted people into jobs, and people were not very happy. And people began to leave, and then there were more jobs to do, and it just was a vicious cycle. But a good leader will look at someone and say, they like doing this, let's have them do that. A guy named Tim, who I was under, who was a leader I worked under, he would look and see people's giftings. Like he saw I was good at photography, so whenever something needed to be photographed, he would send me out to that place and get photographs. Good organizer. So good leaders are good organizers. They delegate well. They're not people pleasers. What I mean by that is if you're a leader, you're never going to please everyone. So you have to learn not to be a people pleaser. Now you need to listen to people and listen to suggestions and be open, but ultimately do the right thing, even if not everyone is with you on it. One man who exemplified that was Peter Cartwright. He was a pastor of a church in USA in the early 1800s, and pretty large church. And one time, just before the church service started, someone came up to him and told him that the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, was going to be in the audience, was going to be attending. And so he should be careful not to say anything that might offend Andrew Jackson. Well, Peter Cartwright got up to give his sermon and said, I have been told that the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, is attending, and that I should be careful not to say anything that will offend him. Well, I just want to say one thing. If Andrew Jackson does not repent of sin, he will go to hell. Well, Andrew Jackson used to be a general, and after that church service was over, he came right up to Peter Cartwright and said, if I had an army of men like you, I could rule the world. So he had respect for Peter Cartwright for doing what was right. Misuses of leadership. Be careful of these whenever you're in leadership. Too controlling. That's a big one. Don't be over-controlling. Be releasing of people into what they're meant to be doing. Superiority complex. I'm the leader. I know better. I'm the one who controls. Don't think of yourself as superior to the people who are following you. In fact, a lot of the time, they may know more about certain things than you do. We have DTSs where someone will take a DTS, and then the next school, right after their DTS, their staff. And then they think, well, I'm the staff, I know better, and they're just 6 months ahead of the other people. That's all. And I have led teams where I have had people on my team who I knew were actually better gifted in leadership than me. And so being a staff person, I didn't let that go to my head, but rather I tried to harness the giftings in each person and not be superior. Too elitist, having all these secret meetings and not telling anyone what the plan is and what the schedule is. Too uninvolved. I've seen some leaders start a project, say to people, okay, here's your project, and they leave. And they never check on things. They never are there to help. So we don't want to be too controlling, but we don't want to be too uninvolved either. Too uncommitted. The same sort of thing where you kind of start this thing and you don't really help it keep going. Too committed to the project at all costs. Some leaders start a project and the project becomes so important, it becomes more important than the people. And they manipulate people and push people and force them to do this thing, and ends up being a bad situation all around. So those are the misuses of leadership. Avoid those if you are in a leadership position. This is General George S. Patton, a very effective general in World War II. And he had the philosophy not to micromanage. He would say, don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their results. I have found that to be true. Many times while running YWAM schools or in YWAM ministry, I've asked a person, can you do such and such? And part of me is tempted to tell them how to do it, but I just figure I'm just going to let them figure it out. And they end up doing it much better than I would have done it or the way I would have told them to do it. So people will surprise you how innovative they can be if you can just release them. George S. Patton also had this saying, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. Some people end up spending too much time planning and not doing. And leaders do need to be people of action. So that can be a good philosophy in many situations. And if you're a leader, don't give up. Good leaders do not give up. One example we can see is Colonel Sanders. You know Colonel Sanders? He started KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And when he was about 65, he didn't have much money. He only had small retirement savings, but not much. And he was trying to figure out what to do. But one thing he had was a really good chicken recipe. So he decided he would go to restaurants and try to, in a sense, franchise his chicken recipe with a restaurant. And so he went to one restaurant, and they said no. Another one, no. He ended up going to over 1,000 restaurants before he found one that would work with him and make his Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then he ended up founding KFC. So, because he didn't give up. And leaders are people who are ready to step forward and initiate. They don't just sit around, but they say, hey, this is a situation. We need to do something about this. So they step forward.
सर आपके लिए उस पार कार का इंतजाम किया है सर आइए सर चल चल जाओ बोला क्या बात करता है क्या ऊपर से जाएगा क्या ऊपर से जा
गया मेन शो
I hate this country. कुछ करो ना.
मैं वहां जाके क्या उखाड़ लूंगा?
कैसी जाने बूंदे आई जाने कैसा दर्द लाई सामने क्या है ये तेरे क्यों रुका है तू बता रे हो कौन तुझको पार लेगा कौन होगा वो मसीहा जिसे तू ढूंढता है वो ही है तू वही है तुझ में तेरा रास्ता है तुझ में तेरा है सहारा तू ही तुझको पार लेगा तू ही है तेरा किनारा रास्ता है तुझ में तेरा है सहारा तू ही तुझको पार लेगा तू ही है तेरा किनारा जिसे ढूंढता है तू ही रे तेरा मसीहा हो
John Maxwell once said, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And by the way, if you really want to learn more about leadership, and really all of us should learn more about leadership, John Maxwell is a very good resource. He has great books sold in India. Also, he has a lot of YouTube videos. Even some of his books are on audio on YouTube, which you can get for free. So I would say get into John Maxwell, and he will benefit your leadership skills.
Hi, John Maxwell here. Welcome to Minute with Maxwell. I walked into a store one day and I saw this sign, and it said 57 rules to success. The first rule was be successful and produce results. Then it said, second rule through the rest of them, they really don't matter. Just do the first one. Get results. Produce. Bring something home. Make something happen. When people ask me, John, how do I spot a potential leader? I always say to them, the first thing I look for is a person that can produce results. Why? Because if you can be successful and produce results for yourself, the odds begin to increase that you can help someone else do the very same thing. If you can't produce, you can't teach others how to do that. You see, we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. So ask yourself, what do I do well? What am I good at? Whatever it is, get better, practice it, and then pass it on to someone else and help them get better also. Results, production, good words. People that can do that well are people that become highly successful. Thanks for joining me today on Minute with Maxwell.
And a good leader needs to have good character. Here we see in Titus 1:7-9 the qualities of a good leader. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and rebuke those who contradict it. So you want to have good character as a leader. Now, all of us actually can be leaders to some degree. I would say about 20% of people, about 1/5, are what we call natural leaders. They just naturally end up as the leader. Probably when they grew up as a child, they were always the leader. George Washington, first president of the USA, they say when he grew up, he was always the leader. And and then about 2/3 of us are trainable leaders. That means we're not natural leaders, but with some instruction and some experience, we can become good leaders. That's the category I am in. I'm not a natural leader. When my first outreach team I led, I learned how not to lead an outreach team. But I learned and became a better leader. Then there's maybe a sixth of the people who just aren't meant to lead all that much, though they would have giftings in other things. But in any case, you can lead yourself. So it's good to learn leadership principles and grow in the area of leadership. So work on growing as a leader. No matter where you're at, try to go up to a new level and you can be more effective. There are many hurting and suffering people out there. So it's so good that we have the gift of mercy and people who are so good at that area to comfort. The gift of mercy. This is the ability to feel compassion for and give true comfort to those who are suffering. Some examples in the Bible. Well, the Good Samaritan. He's the one who stopped and helped the wounded traveler while everyone else walked by. Another mercy person in the Bible would be John. Who was the disciple that was closest to Jesus? John. Mercy people tend to have very close friendships with certain people. And that's how John was. He was the disciple that Jesus loved. He had that gift of mercy. You could see how John was different from Paul. Paul was more like a prophet, right? And so you read Paul's letters, and it's about judgment and righteousness and this and that. And John, you read his letters, and they're all about love, because he's a mercy person. In fact, it was said when John was very old, they would have a church meeting, and sometimes they would bring John in on a stretcher before the crowd. And John had enough energy to sit up a bit and say, "My children, love one another." And then they would take him out. That was his message, because he was a mercy person. Here are some aspects of mercy. Deep friendships, like I said. They can really feel for hurting people. In other words, if someone's hurting, they almost feel their pain. There's a real connection there. They can give true comfort. Those of us who don't have the gift of mercy, we're not as good at giving true comfort in these times. I once took a spiritual gifts test, and you know what I scored on mercy? Nothing. 0. I'm a teacher, so my way of helping is to give information. But I'm not a very good mercy person. And one time I was on an outreach in Alaska, USA. We went to a bus station, and there was a little place in the bus station where you could do like an open air preaching type thing. And so we did that. I was the one who gave the gospel message at the end of it. And then we just went out to talk to people, pray for people, whatever. And they brought this lady who wanted to talk to me. And this lady had been drinking. And when she came to me, she was saying, I didn't know what she was saying, but she was very sad and distressed, and yet all that comes out of me is teacher. I'm saying, well, maybe you shouldn't drink so much, but that's not helping. This woman needed true comfort. But there was a student in our school that was with us named Jenny. She had the gift of mercy. And quickly I scanned the room and said, Jenny, come. And she came to my rescue and was able to give this woman some comfort. So we need people with the gift of mercy. Deeply sensitive. Mercy people are deeply sensitive. They can see when someone's hurting. They attract people in distress because people who are hurting, they want comfort, and so they are drawn to mercy people. They desire to remove hurts. That's a big motivation in the mercy person. Okay, some misuses. So be careful not to do these if you're mercy. Defending someone who is rightly rebuked for doing something very wrong. Sometimes someone does something terribly wrong, they're rebuked, and the mercy person says, "Oh, don't be so hard on them," but that person may have really needed a good rebuke. So don't get in the way of discipline. They say it's good that when the prodigal son was in the pigsty, that there was not a mercy person there to help him, because they had to suffer the consequences to wake up. Tolerating evil. Now, what that means is, say a mercy person is leading a group. There's someone in the group that's doing something wrong. The mercy person doesn't want to rebuke them because they're afraid they may hurt their feelings. They're thinking about not hurting their feelings in the short term. And for this reason, sometimes they tolerate bad behavior. So if you're mercy, you have to be firm sometimes. Failing to be firm, the same reason. Indecisive. I once co-led an outreach team with a girl who was very mercy-oriented. And she often couldn't decide, should we do this or should we do that? Oh, well, I don't know. And I asked her, why are you so indecisive? And she said, well, I'm afraid if we do this, it's going to hurt that person. It's going to inconvenience them. It's not. If we do that, then we'll hurt that person. And so they're so concerned about not hurting and inconveniencing anyone, they can't decide. But you have to learn to just decide, and that some people will just not get their way every time. Leaning too much on emotions. Some mercy people make decisions too much off of emotions, but we need to use logic. We need to listen to God. Defrauding the opposite sex. Like one base I was at in New Zealand, we had a staff girl who was very mercy-oriented. So there might be a guy who comes in the morning and he's all depressed, and she would come and, see he was depressed, and she would give him some comfort and encourage him and so on. And the guy would think, oh, this girl likes me because she's talking with me. And so this girl couldn't figure out why all these guys thought that she liked them, because she was comforting here and there, and they were taking it the wrong way. So you have to be careful not to send the wrong message if you're a mercy person. And we need mercy. We need to all grow in the area of mercy to help people. James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep ones from being polluted by the world. So mercy ministry is biblical. This is a photo of Daisy and Freddie Paul and YWAM Chennai, who have done street kids ministry and worked with orphans and such for many years. My wife there, she for many years had a village ministry doing medical camps and giving people some medical help, and a doctor would come along and everything. But she's a mercy person, so she liked helping people this way. This couple, Margaret and Kim, used to help with disaster relief in their area of India, and when there were floods and when there were earthquakes and these sort of things, they would organize teams to go and help the people. So YWAM, it's a part of YWAM, is Mercy Ministries. For example, when the tsunami hit India in 2004, of course, there was a lot of damage, especially in certain areas of the east and south coasts. And here you can see pictures that I took of the tsunami damage. This was in Royapuram in Chennai. And YWAM jumped in to help. And here are some YWAMers down, and I believe in Kolachel in south. They were giving out surgical masks because there were dead bodies around and people needed masks, and they were giving out water. And then some others in Chennai. Here's Ravi and Rema in Chennai giving out bread at a beach in Chennai. So YWAM values mercy ministry. YWAM had a ministry called Mercy Ships for many years, which had medical doctors, and they would go and give out medical care and medicines. The biggest ship was called the Anastasis. Mercy Ships became independent years ago, and then out came YWAM ships. And that's what we have now with various ships and boats and vessels around the world going to isolated islands, giving medical care. Let me show you a video about YWAM ships.
YWAM Ships exists to reach the isolated. Our mission is to serve those living in remote, unreachable places. We are currently deployed in Papua New Guinea and Micronesia, where people live so remotely it can take weeks to reach them across the vast liquid continent, and in Panama, where both remote islands and inaccessible coastlines exist. Imagine living in a place that only sees a few supply vessels a year, where people cannot rely on help from the outside world. Ships are not just a good idea, they are the only option. The Pacific Link has been deployed in the liquid continent since 1991, carrying volunteers from the international community, including dentists, medical and optical professionals, working alongside community health volunteers and clean water technology trainers. Our continued goal is to bring hope to forgotten families in corners of the world you rarely hear about. In Papua New Guinea, Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has opened the doors for our medical ships to provide help up remote rivers and isolated coastlines where 1 in 7 women die in childbirth, and where people exist with only one dentist for every 372,000 people. This is why our mission uses ships. Vessels can be deployed for long periods of time, bringing help where it is so desperately needed. In Papua New Guinea and throughout Micronesia, people live without access to regular commerce, resulting in entire families surviving on less than $700 a year. We are reaching places where no hospitals or dentists exist, often without phones, power, or running water. So many basic essentials in life we all take for granted. How do we reach them? We pre-position our vessels ahead of time at locations with an airstrip, enabling teams to fly in, climb aboard, and set sail. The captain and crew host volunteers on board the medical ship, providing a floating home as a base for all our activities. We reach patients ashore, as well as bring them on board for surgeries. Whether you are a team, a student, or a working professional, we can use all of your unique skills. You don't need to have a navigation or medical skill to make a difference. If you are willing to come and serve those in need, then we invite you to join us. Help us distribute supplies, give sight to the blind, enable the deaf to hear again, and a chance to live without chronic tooth pain. It is amazing the difference you can make when we all pitch in together. We need nurses, dentists, surgeons, medical technicians, midwives, educators, engineers, doctors, electricians, opticians, deckhands, IT professionals, plumbers, mechanics, cooks, and all kinds of willing hands to help. You can serve on board or at our training center in Kona, Hawaii, or Panama, where we coordinate supplies, provisions, crew, teams, and where we train crew for deployment. If you have an adventurous heart and a desire to impact the lives of those without access to basic resources, then consider joining us. Sail, study, serve. YWAM ships.
All of us can show mercy at times, even if you don't have the gift of mercy. In any area where you have been hurt, you will have the gift of mercy because you've experienced that thing. You can give true comfort. This is Danny Lehman, who is now the dean of the U of N College of Christian Ministries. He was the base director of YWAM Honolulu when I was there, and he took a spiritual gifts test and scored 0 on the gift of mercy. And in fact, I remember one time I had some problem with my foot or my ankle. I was soaking it in hot water, sitting there at my desk, and Danny came by and said, "How's your foot?" And I said, "Well, it's not too good." And Danny just kind of walked away and said, "Well, the Apostle Paul said our earthly bodies are decaying every day." That was his way of showing mercy. But years later, in 2004, my mother died, and I sent out an email saying, pray for our family and so on. I'm going back to the funeral of my mother. And I got this very nice email from Danny saying, "I'm so sorry to hear your mother has died. We're praying for your family," and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, that's just kind of strange, because I know Danny's not very mercy-oriented, and yet he sent me this very warm, heartfelt email after my mother died. But then I remembered his testimony. And his testimony was that when he was a teenager, his mother died, and it was the most painful thing his family ever went through. So because he had experienced that pain, he had anointing to show mercy in that area. Now, a few years later, then my father died. And again, I sent out an email, pray for our family, my father died, and so on. I didn't hear anything from Danny at that time because his father was still alive. So the anointing was not there in that one. So, but when in any area where you have been hurt, you can give true comfort. Colossians 3:12 says, "Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." So let's all grow in this area of mercy and kindness. So that concludes the motivational gifts. And I guarantee you have at least one of those, probably a few of them to some degree. And all these gifts are needed, and they all come to life in different situations. For example, let's suppose someone in your group there were to be sick and end up in the hospital. And 7 people representing the different motivational gifts were to visit that person. They would all have a different way of helping. The prophet would say, "Why did you get sick? Is there some sin that's not confessed in your life?" The server would say, "Oh, here are some of your things, and don't worry, I've made your bed and I've organized your stuff." And the teacher would say, "Well, I've done some reading and I think I've figured out your illness. What's happening here?" I did that one time, actually. I visited a sick friend, and I saw a medical book there and looked up her sickness and told her what was going on. The exhorter would say, well, what are you learning from this experience? What's God showing you? And the giver would say, do you have enough money to cover the hospital bill? And the leader would say, don't worry, I have taken your work duty and assigned it to 4 other people. And the mercy person would say, oh, I just felt so bad when I heard you're sick. How are you feeling now? So they all help. Or let's suppose that you're in a group and you're all having dinner, and then you're going to have dessert, and someone comes out with some nice cake to eat, and oops, the person trips and falls and drops the cake all over the floor. And then the 7 gifts swing into action. And the prophet says, that's what happens when you're not careful. And the server says, oh, I'll help you clean that up. And the teacher says, I see. Actually, the cake fell because it was heavier on that one side. And the exhorter will say, well, we'll just learn from this experience, and next time we'll serve cake at the table. And the giver will say, do you need some money to buy some more cake? And the leader will say, you go get the mop. You go get the broom. You pick up the spilled cake. You go get another one. And the mercy person will say, oh, don't worry. It could have happened to anyone. So they all work together. Now, the question is, which is your strongest motivational gift? Are you a prophet? Are you a teacher? Are you a giver? Is it mercy? Leader? Exhorter? Server? Think about that. And then if you're in a group here, each person share what your strongest motivational gift is.